to the Channel, and it had all of the major terrain, the militarily important terrain features that existed and all that. And then this bright Russian General Staff Colonel got up and briefed what their plan of operation would have been for a war in Europe when the Soviet Union still existed. And boy, you listen to that and say, wow, these guys were planning to duplicate exactly what they had done in World War II. Exactly. And they hadn't changed much in ways of organization. The equipment was a little bit better, but not dramatically so on a comparative basis. And they were making the same assumptions about air power that they had made in World War II and only survived in World War II because of an extraordinary amount of luck on their part, and because that Germany was under strategic attack, which had forced the Germans to pull all of their air power back. So the Russians were fighting without a significant air threat through the majority of the time from December of 1942 on. So we could have beat these guys. It wouldn't have been fun, it would have been pretty expensive, but we could have beat those guys. They did not. They have learned almost nothing since World War II. Well, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong on that, but that was my impression. And my impression is that there are probably a lot of people in the United States that are mentally kind of, well, let's put it this way, are refighting the march on Baghdad. They're refighting the Taliban campaigns and so on, and saying, well, we'll put some more airplanes or more bayonets against this sort of thing, and that's how we're going to deal with Chinese or Russians or Turks or whomever else that we might happen to do it. I mean, the Russians were not stupid people by any means. So if they could get locked into that lack of examination, that lack of critical thinking, then for sure anybody can be. And anytime you think about that, you got to say, all right, let's stand back and really take a really hard look at ourselves. And how is it that we're thinking about fighting a serious war, and what are we really going to do about it?
Sir, speaking of evolution, we're curious to hear your takes on the Air Force as a service. Currently, we have space and cyber operations nested within the Air Force. Do you believe it's appropriate for the service to evolve so space and cyber become independent services? This is a popular question that we like to talk about this year. And if so, what do you think the catalyst needs to be for that evolution to occur?
So if you think about it, can anybody think of a single instance in all of world history where that there was an autonomous horse cavalry force? And the answer, to the best of my knowledge, is no. I mean, horse cavalry has been important, was important for several thousand years, but it was always important as an adjunct to really, when you get right down to it, to heavy infantry and then later artillery. Nor was artillery, as important as it is, ever conceived to be a separate service. So those were ground things that moved on the ground and part of the army or whatever it was called. On the other hand, you've had in every civilization that was close to the sea, you have had a naval service. Operates in a completely different kind of a medium, the medium of the sea, utterly capable of independent operations in many, many cases, independently winning wars in many cases. Makes perfectly good sense to have an independent sea service and not to tie it to a land service. Then along comes right here, the Wright brothers with their first school, and you are suddenly in this new dimension. The new dimension were things that were dramatically different in all kinds of ways, from the ground, from the sea. Made perfectly good sense to have a separate air service. Now you start thinking about cyber stuff. So right now, you can conceive of interesting operations with cyber just the same way that Jeb Stuart could make an interesting swing, long march around with his cavalry before the Battle of Gettysburg, but it was a contributory operation, or at least that was how it was designed. So right now, it seems like that for the most part, that the cyber is contributory and significantly, in my view, to the exercise of air power, but certainly to other forms of power at the same time. Seems to me that you have about the same situation with space. That, yeah, space is different, orbital mechanics are different than flying an F-15, but it's still that it is done right now in order to support, to enhance air operations of one sort or another, or other ground operations. So the focus of anything that happens in space is basically against the ground. Now, does that ever change? And I think that the answer is yes. There will be a time in the future, without any question at all, I believe, that we will break the gravity string, if you will, and we'll be out conducting operations flying in pure space. Will we encounter aliens of some sort? I don't know, we might. Will we encounter asteroids? Yes, with absolute certainty, and so on. So it's when that you get out there and you can actually conceive of independent operations in space that are done in a completely different medium. At that time, well, I would be the first one to stand up and say it's time for a space command. But I don't think that I think we're probably, many of you would know better from a technology standpoint, but I'm guessing we're probably a quarter of a century, maybe a little bit more, away from that particular time.
Thank you, sir. One of the concepts that's come up a lot this year is, we as majors are kind of that mid-level tier, or we're kind of breaking our way into leadership, and we're learning how to do that. One of the concepts we discussed a little bit in our interview was the concept of leading up and how to influence above yourself in the organization. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to do that and what some good ideas for us majors as we're moving along could engender in the way we move forward.
Well, I mean, it's a challenging question. It's a great question. I would mention a couple things. That one, at any level, as a major in a squadron or any kind of another operation, contracting, whatever, you got people working with you, working for you, etc. Getting these people to function as a team becomes really, really valuable. It becomes valuable for you because it makes you smarter, and it gives you a heck of a lot more ability to do things that you think are important. I'll come back again to the idea of the open planning. Get the people together periodically and talk about what it is that you are trying to accomplish, get their ideas, have some sort of a structure for going through the thinking process. Have as good a plan, a set of ideas as you possibly can before that you move up to whoever your superior is and say, hey, I've got a really good idea. And if you thought the thing through clearly, then that you have at least some possibility that you might get approval. Sometimes you might not, but that becomes a different kind of a question and a different sort of a situation. I think it sort of overarching all of that to some extent, though, is this idea that the Air Force, countries, Air Force, Army, Navy, other countries spent a lot of money putting you all through here for the last year. Some of you will stay on for SAS and so on and so forth. It's pretty significant investment. You're pretty smart. I mean, you know a lot of stuff, and you're here because that you are pretty darn good. So if you're pretty good, then that means you probably have some pretty good ideas. So when things come up, really think about, how can I take the initiative? I've thought about this. I'm an expert or a semi-expert in it. How can I take the initiative? And sort of with a minor degree of concern, but nevertheless, I would say that old adage of sort of act first and then ask for forgiveness later is a reasonably good way to do things. How long you can survive that depends significantly on how successful your actions are. If your actions are failures, a really good boss will say, hey, you goofed that up. Why did you goof it up? Well, I did this, this, and this. Okay, don't do that again. Other bosses will say, who are you to do that? You're gone. You go someplace else and try it again. So those would be some thoughts.
Sir, as a former ACSC Commandant, do you have any advice for the ACSC students here in the audience who are about to graduate in 5 days?
Who's counting?
Who's counting? As we're about to head out to staff and leadership positions, do you have any advice for us?
I guess I would reiterate some of what I've covered in addressing the previous question. But it really, I think it comes down to, think about what you've learned, and you've learned some positive things, you've learned some negative things. You certainly have gotten a lot of ideas. That's not a very good way to do that. So try to avoid not doing the thing in that particular way, and you got some pretty good ideas about how to do things, and try to orient yourself in that particular direction. But I think it's a matter of confidence. You should have a lot of confidence, and I know all of you do right now. So capitalize on that confidence and that desire to go out there and make something change in your world and the larger world.
Sir, we have a few minutes to take Q&A from the audience. So we'd like to open it up for questions, if there's any from the audience out there.
Afternoon, sir. Major McDaniel from Flight 21. So over the past 2 days, we've been cautioned not to draw too many lessons from Desert Storm. At the same time, graduating this year, we've read your work and have thought about sort of how it applies or doesn't apply to the current conflict and future wars we might fight. So I guess I've got sort of a two-part question. Looking back, what would you have changed given your framework for how Desert Storm was conducted? And then looking forward, how would you adapt your framework or your way of approaching an air campaign to cover the full spectrum of adversaries that we might have to face?
So the execution of Desert Storm was, it was superb. I really can't think of much of anything that could have been done any different. There were a few minor surprises, like the success of the mobile scuds and so on and so forth, but it ended up being a tactical kind of an issue, which was survivable, and by that it was solved adequately. Solved from a strategic standpoint. So the whole execution worked fine. I think that we probably made two errors at a very, very high level, and I'm talking about a chairman of the Joint Chiefs, White House kind of a level with the first Gulf War. The first one was that we did not think through what our end game was going to be. So when General Schwarzkopf went to Safwan, he basically went to Safwan told to set up an armistice to stop the shooting, etc., as opposed to saying, this is what we intend Iraq to do for the next 10 years, etc. These are the terms that you're going to give to the Iraqis, and tell them if they don't accept it, etc., etc. There was almost a palpable refusal until very, very late in the game for either the Joint Staff or the White House or the State Department to think about how you were really going to end the war. And ending wars it's kind of easy to start them in one form or another, but ending them is a real significant challenge. And if you haven't thought through it and all of a sudden it's there, then you are presented with some really tough things, and you tend to fly by the seat of your pants, and that may not be the best answer, and in fact, in probably 99% of the cases, it really isn't. So we need to incorporate into our strategy thinking construction the idea of you got to know what your objective is, you got to know what you're going to put your resources against, you got to know how much time, and you got to know how you're going to get out, whether you are successful or whether you're not successful. So that's one thing that I think is really important. The other thing that one of the huge lessons, it seems to me, from the Gulf War is this value of time. And the more that you can compress time, the greater the impact that you are going to have on your opponent. If we take Iraq, if we had done the same thing to Iraq that we actually did, the same targets, etc., and had done it over a 2 or a 3 or a 4 year period, a la North Vietnam, some half century previously, I think that the Iraqis could have survived it. because people can deal with serial operations. They can fix things, they can figure out how to react, and so on. I think we got pretty darn close to that necessary amount of time compression against the Iraqis that really simply put them into a position where it was virtually impossible for them to react at any kind of a significant operational or strategic level. Their one minor attempt, the Battle of Khafji, was picked up very quickly, and interestingly, because the communications were in such lousy shape, that Saddam Hussein actually had to drive down there to talk to the Iraqi 3 Corps commander in order to give him the instructions as to what to do, because they couldn't send the things down over what previously had been a very, very good command and control communications kind of a system. So that 40 days was adequate in that war. I don't think that it will be adequate in the next war. And I think that we've got to figure out how to compress that time more and more and more. And as we move into places where people like North Koreans have potentially nuclear weapons and maybe people have satellite killers and a bunch of this other stuff, we really probably got driven down to the point of thinking, how do we compress time sufficiently to create a paralytic impact on an opponent in a matter of maybe hours eventually, certainly days within the relatively short future, like the next 5-6 years, et cetera. So that, to me, is something that simply has got to be done. We've got to figure out how to compress the time. And that, interestingly, has an application whether you are talking about dealing with a large state or whether you are dealing with small groups of people in a la Taliban in Afghanistan or Iraq, or particularly the Islamic State. You think about the Islamic State, and over the last 2.5, 3 years now, that we have done, the last that I was aware of, that it's been something like 5 or 6, 7, 8 sorties per day average that have been spread over, something roughly the size of Alabama. I mean, this is bad if you're standing underneath one of those bombs, but from an organizational standpoint, this is tolerable. So that we can apply this time compression against the Taliban or against the Islamic State, and likewise even with relatively small groups of people that we typically have thought about from a counterinsurgency standpoint, which is probably a bit dangerous to think about anything from that standpoint, is that if you give people little time to move from point A to point B, to rethink their plans, to recover, et cetera, you present them with problems that pretty soon become simply intolerable, that you can't overcome. So I think there was another one over here if we still have time.
Yes, thank you. Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Denis Chechel from Ukraine, and Flight 17, and my question to you will be not relevant to Iraqi war or everything. My question is relevant to Russia. You touched it, and I was listening carefully and didn't get the answer to my question. So, if you like, please, could you share with us your strategical perspective according to situation in Ukraine, in exactly the role of air power in that conflict? Is Russia able to do the next step to escalate this conflict to full scale? What is the probability of using air power? Just your strategic perspective. Thank you.
So I must apologize. I don't have a good current understanding of exactly what the force ratios are, et cetera. My general impression is that if the Russians made a decision to destroy or to defeat Ukraine, they could do it within a very short period of time, and it would be very difficult for you to do anything other than to pull back into some kind of defensible positions and try to prolong the operation long enough that the Russians would say, nuts, I'm going home, or whatever, which is a pretty chancy thing because you have no idea whether they will or not. So then you start thinking about it from a use of your own air power, and I don't know what you have. in any detail, what its range is, what its capabilities is, but I've come back, I really have found this whole 5-ring concept to be really, really an important kind of an idea. And it's important not simply from the application of kinetic force, air power, et cetera, but if you think about your opponent has a central ring that has leadership in it. Well, the chances that you could actually attack that leadership with airplanes is probably pretty small, probably 0 for practical purposes, I'm guessing. So you start thinking, all right, if I can't use air power, what else can I use to begin to get these guys to move in a different direction? What would have to happen for them to say, I don't really want to do Ukraine, I'd rather do something else? Or what can I do to make it more difficult for them to do it? I don't know whether they have financial interests in Ukraine or not, but you know, people do take their financial interests into concern. We certainly saw that in the war against Serbia. So you just start thinking about, okay, I can't do this, but I need to get the leadership to move in a little bit different direction. Or what about the resources that they have, their communications? Is there a way to interfere with that? And that probably begins to get into the cyber kind of a thing. And what I would suspect is that in your case, that what you don't want to do is to get into an all-out kind of a shooting war, because I think that would be very, very unfortunate for you. So you think about strategically, here are the things that need to be accomplished. How can I accomplish those things without getting into a shooting war? So, I mean, this is a very complex question. It's a good one, so those are some thoughts on it.
Sir, I think we have time for one more question, and I see someone standing over there.
Good afternoon, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Hoyer from Flight 23. Early in the year, we certainly spoke and contrasted our ideas about Jomini and Clausewitz. I was wondering if you were able to identify any of the merits of the counter-argument to the 5 rings theory.
No. But I'll expand just a touch on that. And I want to say, and probably with the risk of offending 50% of the people in here, maybe more, that one of let me ask you to name a single country that really believed in Clausewitz that ever won a war. I'm not seeing any nominations. I'm putting a bit in a spot here. So that might suggest that maybe his ideas aren't very good. And just as an example, so Clausewitz wrote about the Napoleonic Wars. How many Navy guys are there in here? You know, a handful in the thing. So you all have read Clausewitz. How many mentions are there in Clausewitz about Royal Navy operations and the creation of a blockade against France? 0, yeah, absolutely 0. So I would say this guy didn't know what he was talking about. He wrote some pretty neat words, maybe, and there's a couple of high-level things. War is a continuation of politics. Okay, fine, got it. And so, read any more? Read something else. So it's not so much a Jomini Clausewitz kind of a thing. There's probably value in Jomini, but it's a little difficult to get out simply because that the things that he's talking about, siege warfare, fortresses, lines of communication, all the rest of that stuff, still really apply, but it's a little bit tough to do that mental translation to move into a current situation. So the idea of spending much time with Clausewitz, just to me no longer makes very much sense. Is there a good substitute for it? I think the 5 rings certainly contributes a lot to the creation of strategy, but so you know, talk about things to do, and some of you are going on for advanced degrees and so on. Figure out a way to replace this guy. And when talking about books, let me just mention one book real quickly. About 2 years ago, roughly, a book came out which was called How the War Was Won. It's about World War II. And it's written by a guy named Philip O'Brien. The basic thesis of this book is that the land battles that took place in World War II were basically insignificant insofar as the success or failure of either side. The thing that defeated Japan and Germany simultaneously, for practical purposes, was the operations that reduced the mobility from strategic, operational, and tactical levels down to pretty close to zero. I mean, you couldn't move stuff, you couldn't move troops, you couldn't move ships, you couldn't feed people. That mobility was just squeezed down to nothing. And that attack on strategic mobility was primarily accomplished through air power and sea power, with probably air power a little bit more important, but nevertheless it was both of them that contributed. But if you start thinking about, well, maybe that's a pretty good answer to what the real to war is how can we reduce the mobility capability of the opponent down to pretty close to zero. That probably provides you success regardless of the operation that you're talking about. If Taliban guys can't move from one place to another, they're not very effective. If Islamic State can't move from one part of their caliphate to another, they are pretty darn ineffective, et cetera, et cetera. So think about that sort of stuff. Read that book if you haven't read it, because it's extraordinarily well documented. The statistics are really eye-opening. So figure out a better, and let's get ourselves out of it's time to end the fascination with on Napoleon. And if you think about it, that Clausewitz was writing a book about the brilliance of Napoleon. The last time I looked, he lost, and he died at St. Helena, a broken man. So probably not the best guy to try to copy when you're trying to put together some kind of a serious war with somebody or other.
Sir.